Okay, well, welcome to the ITSM approval process in change management. If you want to talk about any of the others of the approval mappings and so forth, I can discuss them with you as well. But this is where I had a customer that wanted a specific process incorporated. And what I did was, if I get out of this one, I created this session on showing you how I took their 4 different process flow requirements, non-business processes, because they didn't define them until as we were progressively going, and incorporated that into change management. Now, they did have me add a bunch of custom fields onto change and onto the task. So you may see those custom fields in some of these slides. Okay. But again, that was the process. Can you hear me?
I can, but I don't know if it's the right thing. It's not very.
Let's try this. Is my slide up here still saying the full screen?
Yeah, you should. It's full screen. Just
it's split. All right, so that's better. Can you hear me now? All right. Technology, put in an IT ticket. What is it, a change ticket? Okay, so in this approval process, I was setting up a customer in 20.08 based on a whim. They had no process. They just had some things that they would like to see done. And they said, can you do it? Sure, I can. Well, I did that process by gathering up their information, and they wanted certain people to be able to approve these things at certain levels. And so the AR system server gives us that capability with the approval server. The approval server is not ITSM. This is the AR system approval server. When BMC created the ITSM applications, they tightly integrated the approval server with these, with change and with asset and with SRM when they brought it in and so forth. So again, this is more of a recent customer that I messed with this year. So you'll have quite a bit of the 2008 information that's on display. So the biggest thing is, and this is where our downfall was, I said, we need to have a workshop. And the workshop was for 1 hour. You cannot do a change process of approvals in 1 hour. And then I had to move off of it because they asked me to go to another meeting. And so somebody else took over. And the process of translating what that workshop was did not clearly come across to me. So our workshop was worthless. And so I had to deal with everything coming in from that person. And I hope you can see this clearly. Well, anyway, it has 3 different workflow processes that he gave me 2 weeks after we had the workshop. It has to run through this flow. It's got to go through, as a scenario, they call themselves authors, not writing books, but writing web pages. Okay. They did not want change coordinators. They wanted teams. So they're teams that are writing web pages, and we put it into the change process because then you had to have somebody to review it. You had to have somebody do a technical review, or they called it validator. Then we had to go, in some cases, to the administrator to review it, and then go into the release person. So there's different stages, so different processes. And during those processes, the reviewer and the validator also had to have permission to modify the change request at any stage. How many of you use change management today? Can you modify a change request if it's in the request for authorization stage? Cannot modify the field. So it's very hard to do in that capacity. So my proposal to them was, if it's in that stage, they need to make a change, reject the change, and go back to draft, not to reject it. Then they can make the change to whatever fields that they want to do in that capacity. And then it goes back through the whole process, because whatever they're changing has to go back through those that already saw it. Now they have to see it again because it is a change functionality. So this is what I took. I took these 4 different workflow processes and all their requirements and thrown it into the whole functionality. And this is what we came up with as far as the first one is, the user is the author. The author creates it. It goes to the validator. the validator approves it, then the admin approver gets it. Second one is the reviewer sees it, the validator sees it, the admin approver sees it. The third one was the same people that I just gave you, but then throw in the release approval. And then the last one is no approvals are required. So I asked them, what is the criteria for each of these? I don't know, make it up. That's what his statement was. I don't know, make it up, make it happen. So how I approached this was by the template. They had to select the template. And based on the template that they selected, it would either be a standard flow, it would either be a admin defined flow or release flow, whatever, because I didn't have a lot of information from them. So I used that template. Because I used the template, it also gave the categories of the product category for me to use for their custom fields, because each field had to have a different list of values. So depending on if it was a standard or whatever, you had to have that functionality. But the key was this right here, the approvals, setting up the approval requirement. So this is what I focused my approvals on by setting the tool with these field values. So for the first implementation of going to the validator and the admin approver, I used the class as normal, the change type as change, and the business service is a business service for the change. It's my product tier 3 designator called LOC standard process. Okay, so I use 3 fields. Everybody knows about these 3 fields, right? Class is normal, standard, expedited. If you look at the last one, it says for that one without approvers, it's a standard. Not a problem. Everybody knows about change type is change or project or asset maintenance, which is hidden. So I had to make it, I had to expose it. And then the ProdCat tier 3 is what I used because they had 2 different locations. One location was my tier 2 in my product category. So I used the business service to say that this is a web development at Virginia or San Diego, whichever they wanted, because Virginia was, they were all over the place, but they still had the same process apparently. And then the tier 3 defined which flow that they were using. Any questions on that? So you have to define it. I reviewed the approval process with the stakeholders and they were okay with it. And it flowed perfect the way that they wanted. The first thing I want you to know is in any project, you must have a full admin permission for approvals because approvals will get stuck. And when I say they get stuck, somebody's gone and guess who's got to do it? Well, I got to approve it for you because they didn't do an alternate. Anybody have that situation where people leave? When I at the American Red Cross, I'd always get the security already gone and they're looking for it. They can't get an approval from the security. What do? My standard is I will be your full admin, but I want to tell you why I approved it. I want to tell you why I rejected it. So I go into the work or the activity log or the work log and I put in, I'm approving this based on this email from the security team or this phone call from the security team. I'm covering myself as a full admin. So you need to keep your full admin rights to a minimum. Any questions on full admin? Okay, the next thing this is just showing you how you can create it. I always give myself every process, but you could do specific processes for certain people if you wanted. Understand the different approval stages in change management. There's the review, the business approval, the implementation, and the closure. And you map those up to the what? The statuses. Request for authorization, request for change, schedule for approval, and then you throw in the last one, which is completed final review required. Okay? The customer did not like the statuses. So then I had to create a status field with workflow to set the back end so it would follow the workflow process. Not a bad thing. Challenge was met. Okay? On the left-hand side, know the differences of these change management, change level, and ad hoc. You do an ad hoc and change management. What happens if you reject a change and they want to reopen it? Do you have to recreate the ad hocs or will the ad hoc approvals recreate themselves? You have to recreate them yourself. But all the process will create your review and business approval, but not the ad hocs. Same thing as even if I took it back to draft, they would have to recreate the ad hocs. So I tried to get them to let me put it into the mapping instead of them doing ad hocs. as much as possible. If that doesn't work, email them the change. Ask them to look at the change and give them their feedback. If you don't need a signature, but you need to have them look at it. But if you absolutely have to do the ad hoc, make sure you're aware of it. The chain management chain, they changed this a little bit recently. Before it used to be 2 levels. Now it's only 1, thank God. Because not everybody has a manager to a manager to a manager or whatever. So it's a chain management chain level. But the change process only uses the top 2. Any questions on the stages? When you're defining with the customer the flow process, you have to look at the different levels that are going to take place. So you're looking at if it's a normal with the change type of change, this is the standard flow. What happens at review? What happens at business approval? What happens at implementation approval? What happens at close down? If you look at my implementation approval, I have the change manager signing off at level 1, checking to see if the change is ready to go to the CAB. Then I have my technical CAB, which we just talked about this at our last session. I have the technical CAB come in at level 5, and they're doing their review. Now, some people will say, well, wait a minute, you have a CAB meeting. Why even send them the notification? Well, they're sitting here never knowing what's going on. I'm letting them be aware of what's going on first. So if it's a Wednesday request, but they're not meeting again until next Tuesday, they're already aware of what the change is. They can sign off, but we're not going to release it until they actually get together because they could have a nightmare. Oh, I shouldn't have approved that. Can you reject it? So we still have that covered. The bottom one, I put in asset management because when I worked for this customer on this one, we got paid for every change that we closed. The problem was we had to make sure the CMDB was updated. So if I waited with the task to have the CMDB evaluated, we had to wait till their discovery came in. That could take 2 or 3 weeks. Guess what? That hit our pocketbook. So we made it as an approval, which then made it where out of the implementation, we're now in the close down, and they were okay with that. The customer's okay with it, but we still made sure the asset was updated. If not, we rejected it, and we had to go back and redo the change. Does everybody see why I put the asset level there? That was more of a business move for money. Usually I put it as a task and not even put it in the approval process. Again, talks about your scenario. Any questions there? Okay, so this is where you're starting with the mappings. The mapping functionality to review the different change approval mapping options you have. You have individual, you have group, you have inherent group role. As an individual, do I need to have a license to approve a change? Or change? No, because you have, when that person is assigned an approval, there's an AP signature and they're the submitter of that AP signature. So they can go to the approval console or they can do email approval and sign off. So they don't need a license. If I'm a member of a group and you ask me to sign off for that group, do I need to have a license? Yes and no. I have to have some type of license, need to read, fixed, floating, right? But do I need to have a fixed or floating license? The answer in that case would be yes, you would, because you're part of that group. You wouldn't be in that group if you didn't have a license anyway, so you have to do something in that aspect. And you would have to have the functional role for that group, that permission. Doesn't mean you can change it on the change ticket, but you need to have that functional role. Same thing as inherent group and role. It's whoever's on the ticket, you still need to have that type of permission. So you need to have a license. So the only thing in here is the individual. The individual does not have to have a license in that capacity. All right, so in the process, make sure that you identify the setups for the process flow of change management of the process designators. I had to set up the product category because that was my trigger. The product category is what drove who is the approving authority for these tickets, for these requests. I had to do the change process flow. I don't modify the out-of-the-box global. I create one for the customer and I modify it for the customer. The approval mappings, make sure you set them up to the way that they match to each of the flows. And then the last thing is set up your task and your change templates because I need to have them choose those templates correctly. And you may not have to do that, but it does help if you have templates going on. If you're going to a change, and this is mainly for you, Matt and Kim, is you may want to set up generic templates for normal standard change so they follow the process. So I prefer that they always create a template so they follow what your processes are. And that way you can guarantee a standard. It's going to have a change template anyway. So in the product category, everybody knows how to do the products, right? If you notice, I don't know if you can read this here, but in the center of the table on the left-hand side, it'll say that my product category tier 3 was approval process, pre-approved process, release approval, and standard processing. Do you hear those? That matched to their process flow. So I had to create 8 of those. 4 for one location, 4 for the other. Because my tier 2 was different. Change process flow. I blanked out my customer. I was told not to put them in here, so I blanked it out. But I create my first process configuration for the customer, save it, tells me I didn't create one already, and we'll create the 5 standard or 6 standard records. Then I take those and start building on modifying that functionality. Okay. So on this form, while I'm looking at it here under the approval phase functionality, the first thing that you want to do is change the phase name. Don't stay with normal or review process. Put in the company name in there or abbreviation or whatever. That way you can use it over and over and over again. Because if the phase name is not unique, it'll stop you. Or I'm sorry, if it is unique, it'll stop. Auto approval, you would only mark it as yes if you wanted to automatically approve. You don't have any mappings tied to it. And of course, everything else is pretty much standard in that aspect. No changes or anything like that. Any questions on any of those? When I do the status flow, I change it because of the rejected. Do you notice my rejected now says draft? It does not say rejected. So whoever is coming back and saying, I'm rejecting the approval, I'm really saying something's wrong with it. I know you want to do it, so you need to fix it. I'll send it to the beginning. Because if I make a change at the implementation, I want the reviewer and the validator to also see that change. Because they may not approve that change. So I still leave it to, in this case, the author or the team, who's the coordinator, to cancel the request if they're not going to do it. And then on the additional qualification, that's where I feed it the change type and the timing. Change timing is actually the change, the class designated. Any questions on this? So I have one for each of those. Change normal, change standard, and I have one for each of the different phases that I have to do as well. That's why if you come back to here, you can see all of those levels. You go into your approval mappings and you set those up. So in this case here, I had to map these up to whatever my phase name is here. It's the company name, normal, business, approval. And I put in here, when I selected it, it already had the location. And then I go into the categorization. It had the categorization field. And by selecting it, it also put in the change type in the class. So everything on that ticket would pick up this process flow. If you want this whole documentation, I document everything. If you want detailed step-by-step, all I have to do is get rid of the company, put in a blank company. I'll send it to you if you want. On every step that was done to make this happen, to give you an idea of what the configuration process to map. And by the time I was done, here's all my mappings that I had to create, and then make sure that the transition form was mapped up in this case for each of the values of going from point A to point B. I had to make sure that that was also defined. That was in my tier. That's my custom form. I didn't really have to do that for you to see it. This was my custom form to move my custom status to the behind the scenes status, which is out of the box. Every change should have at least a task. So set up your task to associate to the change. Put them in the change template if you want to. But every change should have a task. That way it advances it from scheduled to implementation in progress automatically after it's been approved and so forth. And then in the change template, you can see in my product categorization selection, when I select it, the VC approval process triggers my approval mappings. It triggers the process flow to pick up which flow it needs to go to. Along with, of course, the classification of class is normal and the change type is change. So to watch the flow process, processing the change request, just to step you through this, the standard request goes to the user, the validator, the admin, and the user process. This is not the pre-approved. Remember I said it's pre-approved was the bottom choice. This is where nobody had to approve it. This is the standard, which goes to this level. So when you go in and log in, everybody can see I'm logging into Helix. I had my John developer come in from Virginia. And John developer selected the information that he had to put into the request. He has to select the templates that are matching to their designator. So I separated the templates to Virginia people can see their templates and the San Diego people can see theirs. So they come in and type in Virginia. You see the 4 templates of the 4 different processes. Whichever they pick, in this case, they need to pick the standard approval. It populates the ticket itself. These are the custom fields I told you I had to put in. On the left-hand side over here, you can see the specific data requirements. Those custom fields I added into the form. I even put it into Smart IT, so you can see it in Smart IT. Okay, but they didn't like it because we can't do PWA in 20.08. You could do it in 21, you couldn't do it in 20.08. So I couldn't put the field side by side in Smart IT. So we had to go to the ITSM side because they wanted the fields side by side. Because if you do custom fields in Smart IT, they're stats, one after the other. Okay. In the task form, once they selected the template, the task came along, and my task form, I think I have it. Let's see. No, I don't. On my task form, under the general tab, is another list of custom fields that they wanted as well. So in this case, in the task, they go in and update it, they assign it, they fix all the tasks, they select any additional tasks that they want to. Everybody knows how to do that. They selected that. Now I have my 2 tasks that are set up and ready to go, and they're in sequence 1 and 2. And they're going to stay staged until they go into implementation because we did not incorporate task-based management. Okay. I create an ad hoc, fill it out, and now I have 3 of them. And of course, I can reorder it if I wanted to from that aspect. I click on the view, and I like to see the view because then I can see what has to be done. But you can tell by this, I reordered my sequence of 1, 2, 3 to 1, 2, 2 from that designator. Now I'm ready to save it. So I saved the ticket. I advanced the change request, and now you can see that it is over here on the right-hand side. It's kind of hard to see it, but the validator approver is now assigned to the ticket to approve. But the problem is all these fields are read-only. So down in the bottom, that person gets notified. They can now come in. This is a nice little feature that they wanted. They wanted a little bell with a counter of how many approvals that the person logged in has to have. So I put this on in the back end, and it goes with all the forms. All they have to do is click it. It goes to the approval console. They can sign off from there. But at least they know how many approvals they have to sign off on. They get that in DWP, but do they get it in Smart IT? I don't think they get a counter, do they? But they can search to see what they have to approve and get it that way if they want it. So anyway, they go into the approval console in this capacity. You can see that it's my who submitted was John Developer. It comes in as my person is Ralph Validator. Ralph can go ahead and approve all these. Once they approve it, it basically then says it's good to go. We pass it on. And now I go ahead and log in, and you can see that, well, it's kind of hard to see, but Ralph's number goes from 6 to 5 because he already approved the one record. The developer can review it. They can see that the change request is moved to schedule for approval because we skipped planning in progress. We had no need for request for authorization or change, or in other words, the business approval. And so now my admin had to sign off because they're in the next level. Remember, it goes from the author to the validator to the admin. So I go from request for from draft to request for authorization, skip the request for change because I don't have an approver, skip planning in progress because I skipped it on that process flow, skip schedule for review in the rules of change management, and I hit schedule for approval. And by hitting schedule for approval, now I give it to the admin. The admin then now goes in and signs off on it, implements it. And then the rest of the process takes place from that point, where now the ticket is in scheduled, the task is released, the individual assigned to the task can now work on the ticket. So then they come into the first one, they set it to close. You can see now it's closed, but the next two are set to assign. They process those two. You can see in the flow, the first task is done, but now the second two are now in assign, and we save it. They now go to each task and they do whatever they have to do. They fill it out, they save it. Now, once we're done with the last of the task and we save it, you can now see all my tasks are closed, and the last task that is closed will then go ahead and move my change request to the completed final review required. Now, if you notice this, it skipped that and went to what? Oh, I hit it. It's final review complete. They didn't want to see those two. So I hit those. You wouldn't know it, but they know it now because it's marked as completed. But on the back end, it's completed, final review, complete, because I don't have any closed down approvals. And then the auto closure will kick in. I think it's 30 days or 15 days, 15 days. And then we'll close the ticket. So did you want me to show you the process again? Stop in any process and talk about it? Does anybody have any questions about the change approval? Yes.
I can't remember exactly what it's called, but how when you get to a certain phase, it attaches the approval to the change, basically runs every minute. Is there any way to change that time?
Attaches the approval to the change every minute?
Yeah, I think it's fires off, but it can sometimes take almost up to a minute. Depending on the time.
It's
they submit the change after wait 58 seconds if they hit it just right.
Well, it's I have seen it where it's taken longer than that. But on the environments that I've dealt with lately, I have not seen that issue. It's automatically happening. So you must have something running behind the scenes or something on the maybe the environment itself that's causing it to take that long.
I don't think it's specifically 20 days.
It's not, but I think it's something to do with maybe the RAM on your machine, or it's something to do with your environment that's doing it. Because I have had that issue. I've had the issue where the customer just said, I can't do this. They're hitting refresh. When's it going to change? When it's going to change? And it took us a couple of minutes, not just one, but a couple of minutes to process.
Sometimes if there's a lot of things in the application pending form where it's trying to go through to process it.
Yeah. So you may have hit the time when maybe an import of LDAP. Do you do LDAP importing to update the CTM people? Middle of the night? Okay. Do you have any other processes running? I mean, just take a look at the application pending form then and see if anything else is there. Again, you could have some ghost application pending things like SLM connector and stuff like that. That's why I don't. And those things are good. Yeah. So I really can't answer that question because without taking a look at your system and seeing what could it be. But I haven't seen that issue on mine in the last couple of years that I've worked with change.
We're still on 914.
I don't think it. Well, I haven't had it. I had on 9104 and I didn't have an issue there. But again, I have seen it where it has been slow.
Have you ever run into a scenario where you want to customize and add an additional attribute to the change?
Okay, the question is, have I run into a scenario to add an attribute to the change approval mapping, which I'm assuming they're going through the approval console?
Right. Well, what I'm looking at specifically is, you can map by out. So
Oh, you're talking about the mapping itself.
The mapping itself, we kind of like to see that add change temp. Very heavy use of change temp to help, force people to go down specific paths based on what they're working with. Yes, that drives all the opcats and broadcasts, but there are so many times when I've run into a scenario where it would be really nice to be able to just map it based on the template itself. It's not a capability. How difficult it would be to customize.
It's a two-step process. Really.
Yeah.
You have to get the field to the mapping. then you have to go into the approval administration console into that chapter query, and then you add that value, that query.
But don't you have to have workflow to?
No, because that query does get nice and trigger. It mostly do now, and this value as well as the condition.
Okay, so the response here, since he's far away, is adding the custom field to the approval mapping form and adding it to the approval console query. So a query's on. Is that the? Do you know what the name of the form is on the approval console? It's not the approval console, though, would it?
You go into the approval admin console.
I see.
If you get next approver, you got the query. These finds on what it lists for on the mapping form. And then you just add in that condition to look for that. Yeah,
I think it's rule, right?
Rule, there you go.
All right, so let me know if this is that large enough to see? So you're saying going under the rule here.
So you go up in the site change process.
Oh, select change process. Oh, down here. Sorry. So any of them, right? Like, okay. Okay. So view it. Wait a minute. Okay, I'm in dev. Just checking. I'm in dev.
Okay. All the same format. Is it no or is it?
That help you?
Yeah. No matter how long you've been working with plans,
well, we actually taught that forge stuff a long time ago when I was with the RMI Corporation and bled into BMC, but I've never had a customer ask to change it. So it's like I lost that knowledge if you don't use it. So, but yeah, thanks for that, because it's like, it makes it easy. Definitely.
What determines when an approver gets the notification that he has to approve something? Somebody will ad hoc add an approver. And it seems like they get the approval right away.
They do.
But they're still in planning in progress status.
Right.
And so they go to approve it, and you say, sorry, you can't respond to active approval.
That the ad hoc is an AR system functionality. It's not an ITSM functionality, where the approval process that we just went through is the ITSM process. So when you do an ad hoc, the ad hoc will let you create it and automatically send it out to that person immediately. The problem with that is you really don't want to send out the ad hocs till you're ready to advance it to the next level, is what I run into. Because I get that and they come up and say, I can't approve it, like you said. And that's just because BMC didn't merge the ad hoc into the change request to map to the stages in that capacity. So I run into that issue as well. So I always say, wait until you're ready to move it to the next level. So don't do it at draft and do an ad hoc. Do it as a draft, hit the ad hoc, and then go to the next stage. So that way they can approve it at the request for authorization instead of at the draft stage in that aspect. But again, does it stop it from moving to the next level? It should. It's supposed to. It's been a while since I tested that out. But most of the ad hocs I get involved with are usually at the planning in progress and ready to move on. Then I say just wait till you're ready to advance it and then do that. But if you can't wait, try the email system, asking the person to look at it and get their feedback before you move it from PIP to the next level. But yeah, that's just because the way the integration, they didn't really integrate the ad hoc capability. It's just the design. It's the lack of design, I guess, in that case, because the ad hoc was, you could do it, but we're not going to tightly integrate it like we did with the process flow.
Yeah. Okay, I was going to say, we've seen that happen. Yeah, it is actually a little because then there's there's a problem with the AV signature and the detail where it's not, in that case, picking up the is active approval from the change. So in those particular cases, you might have to we go about in our section too. That's always fixed. It's very rare that it happens.
But you really don't want them to do an ad hoc approval Watts and PIP anyway, do you?
Well, I got it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've run into that too. And again, the only thing without actually going and trying to break it or figure out what it is, I just tell them to wait till they're ready to move it to the next level and then push.
Form to say if it's not active, it wasn't checked, said it's a no, and then when the real approvals come through, check to see if there's one, see if another needs to be updated, and then it's all sent out.
Yeah.
But I just know if there was a configuration thing that I wants to.
Oh no, there's not a configuration that's been like that. I mean, I was caught off guard when they didn't recreate them. What they recreate everything else. Why didn't you recreate the ad hoc? Because you got all the records right there. They don't do that, but they do recreate the approvals at the other levels. If I take it back to draft. Right. So again, I would have to look at that to say, well, if there was any ad hocs created, do I recreate them? And then I'd have to make sure it gets recreated at the level that it's supposed to go. But yeah, I've run into that as well. Any other questions?
So just curious how other people handle determining which changes are going to be discussed. Right. Are you basing it, most people are usually basing it on just the CAD approvals that are in existence when the CAD kicks off, or is there some other?
Well, hopefully you've sat down and did your business process as to what's classified as standard, normal, and expedited. Keeping in mind, expedited has already been done. Emergency goes through a different process, but it's more mainly the normal that you're focusing on that goes to a CAD in that aspect. The standard is, have you ever done this before? If you haven't done it before and you're putting it in change, go to the CAB. Not expedited, go to the CAB. And the CAB says, well, let's run through it again. So you usually can run it through 3 times. If the CAB determines that you must always get the approval because they're the ones that do it. If this change is going to break something or possibly break anything, I want to prove it. I want to see it so it'll never go into standard. But if they say, hey, this is not going to break anything, this looks like it's fine, we tested it 3 times, then they make the call that it's standard. So that's the guidelines that they generally use, but I can't do by situation because everybody does it differently in that capacity.
And what we're looking at is we've got a process whereby the changes that are going to be done
right
prior to the CAD kicking off. I'm just wondering how other people do it. You know, whether you talk about the change status and it's ready to be approved.
Well, when you're presenting a report as the CAB facilitator, and you're presenting a report to the CAB, what's going to be the biggest discussion that they're going to have? It's going to be those changes that are up for approval. Mm-hmm. So I would always start off with let's get it out of the way first. What changes have been completed? Mm-hmm. All the changes. Okay. How many standard changes? Here's this list of the standard changes. Nobody really complains about it, but I give them a list. Here's the active standard changes. Those are within a couple of minutes, you're done. Now you get into each individual that's ready for them to be approved. And that's what I sat on cabs is watch them do it. And they will go in just like you were in here when I told you about the one it took me 25 pages to do the change approval request to get through the cab. I had to sit there and wait. And what they did was they did that. They went through the ones that were done, they're standard, and then they hit each individual. And it took me like 25 minutes to explain what we had to do and how to do it. And they pondered, asked questions, and then they said, no, can't do it yet. Let's think about it. And then I took 25 minutes in that aspect. But they got rid of all the basic stuff up front. And that's how I would approach it. Because you got to get it done and get it through. Right. And they don't care about any upcoming changes unless they want to. If you have any upcoming changes, you could pull up the calendar if you wanted to and show them what the changes are that are scheduled. That's another thing people see is like, well, we don't need to approve it, but they want to see the expedited, the whatever other changes and so forth. So you could say these are the changes that are scheduled to take place in a report as well, which is helpful because they're not going to meet again until the next week. So then they can be aware of what's coming. The use of the cap shouldn't take more than an hour is what you want to try to get it down to. And that's why I do the approval notifications so they're aware of it. So then when we come to talk about, oh, I have a problem, go ahead. So now those major ones are now released, they're reduced down to just when somebody has a real pain about something, then they can bring it up. Like an application manager could say, that's going to kill us. We're doing an upgrade. Why are you doing a database? We have to do this this weekend. This is when we got the contractor. It's costing us a couple $1,000s to bring that person in. So then the DBA has to stop. So then that's when you have that discussion. Okay. Any other questions? Hey, our Zoom stayed up this time. So, well, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and stop.